Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms where I give you a heads up about upcoming shows and which date and time they will be aired. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, you can find links to the shows, MP3 files which you can download, or links to your favorite platform like iTunes, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and all other major sources. You can find information for upcoming and past talk show appearances as well as new book projects at MarlenePardo.com. You can also purchase books and merchandise there. And you can visit my author page on Amazon at Marlene Pardo Pellicer. Due to popular demand, I'm narrating my True Believer stories that I've collected throughout the years in a new series called Supernatural Storytime. You can find links at supernaturalstorytime.com. If you are into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate some of those at Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If you would like to read noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I do want to thank you all for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I am doing fantastic. It's kind of springtime here in South Florida, which you know what that means. It's starting to get hot. And we're starting to go a little bit into the rainy season. And normally I'm not that thrilled, but I have about over an acre of new longan trees and mango trees that I planted since last year. And I get it now with the farmers. I get it about the rain. Before it was like, oh my God, it's raining. Now it's like, oh, it's going to rain. Good. Because then that means I don't have to worry about watering. I've got young saplings out there. I've got about over 100 of them. And let me tell you something. I'm a micro farmer, and I get it now. I get it about the rain thing. So, yeah, that's why I'm mentioning it. That's why I'm so happy about it, because I don't have to do duty of making sure that everything out there is gets watered, because eventually, of course, we're hoping, since these were grafted trees, that maybe in a couple of years we'll get some harvest out of them. But yeah, and you know, you lose a few along the way. So yeah, my adventures in micro farming. But anyway, and of course, you know, I have the chickens, etc., etc. So anyway, guys, let me tell you about today's guest, which I'm so excited about. I have a gentleman by the name of Allan Pacheco. Now, Allan is an author. He's an investigator. He's a metaphysician, a historian, and a SAG actor. He was born in Santa Fe, and his ancestors pioneered the area. And I asked him, when you say, how long have they been there? Try the 1500s. Hello. You know, like I was telling him, the best I got is maybe 2 or 3 generations. And after that, I'm relying on my pie chart, and that's about it. But anyway, let me bring Allan on. And of course, I want to, well, you know what we're going to ask him, right? Okay, but here we go. How are you doing today, Allan?
I'm doing very fine. Hello, Marlene.
It is fantastic to have you on here, Allan, because I know that you have stories, personal history, and we were talking about it briefly before we started to record, which is natives of certain areas of cities, whatever you want to call it. They're the ones that sometimes have the best stories, the most accurate knowledge, you know, the truth, if there's truth to be told. And boy, you definitely talk about roots. But anyway, I'm going to ask you, Allan, what I ask all my guests, which is, how did you get involved in the paranormal? Childhood experience? What happened?
Well, let's go to childhood. Even as a child, I had an awareness that others did not have. For example, you're 3 or 4 years old, and you're there with your elders at a crosswalk at a major intersection, and everybody's looking across the street. And I'll get the urge, the energy, whatever you want to call it, to look to the right, and then that's where the car accident happens. Now, I had that kind of radar. Now, it's not always on,
right.
and it comes and it goes, and I'm not going to be like one of those phonies that on some of the cable channels that, they say that you can see things all the time. No, nothing like that.
Okay. Well, but that's still, that's even as a kid, that's heavy duty. That's a heavy duty experience there. You know that.
Yeah, and then further on into life, other things happened that cemented it. I was around a lot of different types of incidents that, read like a novel. And with that, finally, you say to yourself, there's something on out there, and don't make science your God. They can't explain any of this, and delve into it. So I started doing that, and that's it in a nutshell there, Marlena.
Okay, so in other words, it sounds like you had that tingle. How did your family handle it? Were they aware that you were having these experiences, or did you keep it to yourself?
Oh, yes. I'll just okay, you're Cubana, and I'll just say this, and then we'll get back into English. But the elders would say, Allan, no seas así, mentiroso. And Allan, don't be this way. It's your imagination, you liar. And of course, with that kind of, energy sent your way, you doubt yourself, and you try to say, no, there has to be a reason for this, a reason for that.
Sure.
But eventually, you get to a certain stage and you say, no, there's more to this. Look what's happened. They're wrong. And one of the bad things about junior high and high school is they try to stomp out your intuition, and they'll try to say, oh, Darwinism is the way, or this and that,
exactly.
And there's no such thing as any of these other types of things, and the Romans and the Greeks, the Aztecas, that's all nonsense. They're just great storytellers. No, there's more to it than that.
Well, and it's a shame because it's always got to be an either or. Either it's totally science, which of course, like you said, is like if you're smart and intelligent and educated, you don't believe any of that other stuff. Or if you go, then you're superstitious, and it's kind of like inferred that like you suffer, and you don't know any better. And I get it. I mean, I grew up in that, and don't get me wrong, I don't think you have to exclude one to have the other. Everything has its value, but unfortunately, a lot of what we're talking about, whether it's the paranormal or experiences, you just can't quantify it. You just can't reproduce it. I can't measure it. I can't. And then, of course, that's where science says, well, if you can't do any of that, then I guess it just doesn't exist.
Right, exactly. And again, too, science, it's its own religion, and they're going to say you're a heretic, and they're going to try to stomp you on out. And that's where we get the people like Carl Sagan, who says, oh, there's no such thing as life out beyond Earth. Well, gosh, how are you going to exclude all the things that have happened as far as UFO activity?
Right. And again, and I think that sometimes, because a lot of times people don't realize life as we understand it and know it, carbon-based life, but there could be forms of life that exist that we wouldn't know it if we saw it, if it was a 2x4 and hit us on the head, because we just don't have a concept for it.
Right.
We always just relate it as to what we see as life here, us, plants, animals, etc. But there could be other forms out there.
And for example, energy, that's in its own world. For example, you can say, again, too, the Carl Sagans of the world, there's nothing after this life. That's all there is to it. You're like a battery that's going to disintegrate into the ground. Well, no. I mean, where does the energy of the life force go? All kinds of things that are out there that we, the people, have become sheeple because that's part of the program of the educational system.
Right. Well, and I have a theory, and I know more than one person thinks of it, that a lot of people that during life held that belief that there's nothing beyond when you're alive, as in the body. When they go into the afterlife and they find that that's not the case, sometimes they become ghosts because they're just trying to figure it out then. It's like, what do you mean? I thought that When it was over, it was over. What do you mean I'm still self-aware? I don't get it. And I think that sometimes they account for some of the ghosts that hang out at least for a little while to understand that there's more to us than just our physical bodies.
That, yeah, in some in some encounters or throughout the world, yeah, you're going to find some of these energies that are the question mark. They are so far away from, or they're so ingrained, I should say, into what they believed, into their baubles, into their furniture, and then now they're dead and they're not going to move on. Mm-hmm. Yes, and there's some like that. And of course, there's other ghosts, other types, different energies. Some are evil, some are neutral. It's just like a freeway. I mean, you have Volkswagens, you have Porsches, you have Chevys, You have Ford. Yes.
Yeah, everybody's, and I know some of them are aware of living humans, and others are just stuck on a loop, reliving or redoing what it was. Because let's face it, it's an understatement that human beings are creatures of habit, and sometimes I think even in the afterlife, the ones that get stuck, they want to still continue doing. This was maybe what they did for 30, 40, 50 years of their lives, and they still want to, or like you said, they still have that ego where it's my house, I built this house, or I lived here, my things, my stuff. And
right.
they haven't shed the ego part of their personality, so I think that binds them sometimes. They keeps them earthbound, wanting to still basically stand guard over their things.
Yeah, those type of energies, those type of spirits, those type of ghosts in life, they were the selfish, miserly, arrogant. The old saying is, they had wide lawns in front of their manor, but they had very narrow minds.
Yes.
And those are the type of ghosts that you say that are in that loop that will come back and be seen doing things over and over again. And unfortunately, every now and then we run into those type of people in our life.
Yes, of course. Yes. Yeah, they're controllers. They're controllers.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a whole host. Just I think as varied as human beings are when they're alive, I think that's why you will get some people that when they get it, when they die, they move on, and then there's others that get stuck for a little while, and there's others that just get stuck. Period. They're they still can't figure it out for some reason, or the ones, and I'm sure maybe you've run across that just are not aware that they're dead. They just miss the part of the you're not a living human being anymore.
Well, their soul has been so darkened by, again, too, making their title, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, this is my mansion, that has been ingrained into them, that selfishness. And then there's others, too, that been darkened by evil and are still here and basically a vehicle for evil energy.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's other beings that, a multitude of them, that are confused as ghosts, and they're not. Mm-hmm. They're demonic, or, for example, they can be jinns.
Right.
And again, that's controversial. And there's, like we mentioned before, there's just so many of them. So when people say, "Oh, well, there's only this category, that category," that's nonsense. This is you name it, it's in this world, and different colors mean different things for ghosts, different vibrations, and how you attract them, how you repulse them. It's beyond belief.
Well, and people are not aware because they don't realize that there's a whole host of what are non-human entities besides demons. There's a lot of other things, like you said. There's jinns. Even though some people will say they overlap, it's a different name for the same entity. But there's a lot of other things out there that have never been human, and they're on the non-human spectrum.
And that's one of the things about channeling and how come people have to be so careful about this.
Oh my God, yes.
Is because there is so many things, and from other dimensions, other worlds, whatever you want to, perhaps both, that are seeking a host, and these things are evil. And that's how come I say channeling, don't be careful, avoid that, because, for example, the Ouija board, that's a parlor game, but don't mess with that. That's Russian roulette. Yes. Because what you're bringing on into your house is going to say, oh, I'm your old great Auntie Jane. Mm-hmm. Well, that's masquerading as your great Auntie Jane. Right. And once it's there, it's looking for something, the weakest, be it the youngest or the oldest, something to become a parasite to and enjoy the physical sensations of that body, and also to be able to create more mayhem.
Yes, and I tell people, a lot of times, how that story that you see in the movies about having to invite the vampire into your house, a lot of these entities, sometimes what they seek is the invitation, but people don't realize that an invitation can be taken in a lot of different ways, not just specifically saying, oh, I invite you. You could invite them, like you said, through channeling, opening up yourself to channeling, or playing around with the Ouija board. And sometimes they won't take you up on that invitation right at that minute. But once it's extended, it's almost like they want to negotiate it, like you said, either disguising themselves as a spirit or a person that they're not. Sometimes, you've heard, I'm sure, of people that it's a little kid. Yeah, sure. If you don't think that, I tell everybody, this is the Trojan Horse of a lot of very dark entities. Because, of course, people feel sorry for a child. They are not threatened by a child spirit, supposedly. And, of course, if the child spirit is communicating that they're lost or help, everybody's like, oh. And it's like, you have to be really, really careful because, like you said, they disguise themselves in the best way that they think that they will be gain acceptance and get an invitation of some form into your world.
Yes, red alert. And when you do that, and again, too, one of the things that I have not when you do that, but let me say this, that when people treat this as a rock and roll concert, like some of the paranormal shows on out there, no, again, too, you're going to be tasting hemlock, which goblet has 7-Up, which one has hemlock.
Exactly.
Don't do it. And the same thing with the drug abuse.
Sure.
With that, it's going to be walls of resistance, not only of the mind, but of the soul. And you have these things searching for this host. And unfortunately, now drugs are even worse with all the hoochie-potely type of mojo that is being put into it in Mexico, the cocaine that's being passed into the USA. Yes. So you're getting the double whammy.
Yes, and unfortunately, it's very inexpensive, some of these drugs. As far as, once upon a time, let's say for cocaine, if you had that habit, it was an expensive habit. Okay.
Right.
This was the 70s, 80s, the 80s, and I'm talking here Miami, the cocaine cowboy times. That was an expensive habit. And once they started producing all these cheaper drugs like crack and a lot of these other synthetic stuff, forget it. It takes very little for people on the streets to acquire it, and it's unfortunate. And absolutely, I've worked with through hypnotherapy with spiritual attachments. And I know that a lot of people that find themselves in addiction situations, about 99.9% of the time they have an attachment, a spiritual attachment.
Bingo. You're one of the first people ever on a radio show or podcast that has come out and said that. Yeah. That's absolutely right. Because it's not, the old, the demon rum, the chiva, the horse, the heroin. It's not. It is the entity that is going to look for that. And one of the things, and this is how come I'm so adamant about the border wall, is 90% of the drugs that are coming into the USA come through the frontier that's just south of where I live. Yes. And with that, you're bringing all of this disaster and paranormal mayhem, like what you said, attachments to the American public.
Yes, well, and this is the thing. It's like, it's almost like you have somebody that's got and like what I said, that maybe they've had trauma that opened them up and they have a spiritual attachment, sometimes several. I mean, it could human, non-human, you name it. And like you mentioned earlier, they're looking for a human host in order to experience the sensation of taking the drug that they could once upon a time when they did have a living body. But then when you have a person in that predicament who they facilitate the drugs by supply and by very cheap prices, then you have what they call these epidemics. And unfortunately, that's, I think, where we find ourselves, that nowadays, I mean, drug abuse has been around, but usually it was much more difficult. But like I said, it's become so inexpensive and it just streams in. And people sometimes, I want to say, sometimes they're at the mercy of experiences they've had in this lifetime, but they're really also being sabotaged because of spiritual attachments and turbulence that walks with them.
Yes.
And I know, and you know, and living where you live, you know that also there's a lot of dark magic that they practice south of the border as far as with the drug trade, as Santa Muerte, etc., which is a death cult. Okay.
Yes.
When you start working with that, and I know there's people that will say that some people that believe in Santa Muerte, they don't look at it as a dark practice. In other words, they might have an altar to Santa Muerte, Holy Death. Okay, maybe they'll offer flowers or whatever, but there's a very dark aspect to the Santa Muerte cult and the belief in Santa Muerte. Okay.
Yes, exactly. You know, the old saying is, and you know, you're going to get this with the Sicilians, as you're going to say, you lay down with the dogs, you're going to wake up with the fleas.
Yeah.
And you're giving flowers to a death cult. That's just like what the Aztecs were doing with the Huichipotle, with human sacrifice.
Yes.
And you're giving this energy or emotion to something demonic.
Yes.
And muerta, that's death. You know, you can say muerto or muerta, depending on what conjugation or what you're going to be. But you're talking about a goddess of death, something that's going to disguise itself. Death can be very beguiling.
Oh, yeah.
For example, people get tricked, and we'll get back to what you're talking about with drugs here. But for example, the 1969 Altamont concert there outside of San Francisco, that in itself was a what would you call it? An invoking. They did a documentary on that in the early 70s, Give Me Shelter. But in other words, that's where the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger and his odd outfit is singing Sympathy for the Devil. You got the Hell's Angels there. You got people being murdered there in the audience. You've got the big bonfires going on there. In other words, that's a camouflaged invoking for evil.
Yes.
And you had at minimum 250,000 people there. And that's just an example of something that people can Google and watch on YouTube or read about. But what you're talking about is a parallel, but it's coming to somebody bringing flowers to something evil as far as cult practice.
Well, yeah, this is, and that's the thing. I mean, there's different names for Santa Muerte. They call it La Flaca, La Niña Bonita, the pretty girl, the skinny one. I mean, all those things are inferences to death. And I mean, some people look at it like I call Santa Muerte light, but it's very heavily involved, and it's I believe that there's even chapels that a lot of the people that are involved in the cartels and the drug trades, they have adoration for this saint because they believe that it protects their whatever it is they're doing, okay, which is a lot of death, either directly or indirectly, and of course something that ultimately, even if, let's say, you don't kill the person, but if you're helping to transport a substance that eventually it's going to cause the death or destruction of a bunch of human beings, how can you not, be affected by it on a spiritual level? I mean, yeah, you might end up with a lot of money, but...
Yeah. With that, and again, to what you're talking about with these places where they bless the drugs,
yes.
And you can say Santa Muerto, Santa Muerta, and again, two different conjugations of this here. And you're blessing this, and it's going on into the USA. And again, these people that are making the money, and then you look at what they're doing with the money.
Yes.
You look at all the carnage, not only in the USA by drug addiction, by people in prison, by overdoses, by crime, but you look at all the murder rate that's going on here, as well as across the border in Mexico.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible thing.
Well, no,
and people do not understand this is a form of Luciferianism.
Yes, of course. And this is the thing that people don't understand. A lot of the objective of dark entities, Luciferianism, is the anguish of the human spirit.
Yes.
A live person that suffers is in agony, whether it's physical anguish or mental, spiritual anguish. This is what it seeks. And that thing with the drugs, okay, you could say, well, the person, but it has a ripple effect because the family or the people around this person, they suffer tremendously. So it's not just isolated to that one person who's addicted, okay? It expands outward from there, causing untold misery to the people that love that person, the children. I mean, it's like what the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah.
Yeah. In the negative, that gift.
Oh,
that
of
keeps
course,
on giving
absolutely,
in the negative. And the reason, the world according to Allan, the reason that we're here is to grow our soul.
Yes.
And when you have all of this, satanic energy going against you from this, well, then you're just going to be trying to hold on to what you got, and you're not going to be able to grow your soul. And that's what this is all about. I say the inside part of it. The statistics, the other types of stuff, okay, well, that's going to be the tip of the iceberg. But what they're doing is they are, in essence, destroying the American population from the inside out, from the soul.
Of course. Well, and this is the thing, Allan, nowadays, a lot of these horror movies, a lot of that they are into the possession, supernatural possession by the devil, and it was like, people don't understand. People that usually engage in this type of trade are what I consider perfectly possessed. Okay? They are willing hosts to demonic entities. And God knows what else, because that's a whole thing that we can get into. But it's almost like, because you always see these movies, Hollywood's version, which is like The Exorcist, where you do stupid, you float and it's like, no, the most dangerous, awful part of a perfect possession is that you willingly engage in the destruction of other human beings and the corruption of the spirit of other human beings.
Exactly. And that is one of the things, let me just say two things on this. First of all, the real story behind The Exorcist is how that started was because the teenager was playing around with a Ouija board.
Right.
And that's how that started. But as far as, again, you said about the Trojan Horse and about what you see in filmdom, TV, etc., I'm a SAG-AFTRA actor, and I can tell you from first-hand experience, I have run into some of these characters where you say to yourself, my gosh, this is how they have gotten ahead. They are bloodless, soulless, and they've made their deal, and this is the kind of garbage that is coming on out now. And again, too, that's one of the reasons how come we have such poor quality when it comes to the arts now, is because of what is being sold to the public.
Yeah.
And it's part of an insidious type of plan. People say, well, matrix, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
That of what we do with teaching people at a young age, because the family breaks on up, and then they're lucky if they get a good teacher, a couple of good teachers during their 12 years in school, but usually they're just getting people who are in there for the pension, who really don't care about the kids. And then if the kids aren't having any type of, guiding light from the family, from the school system, because the school system just perpetuates adolescence into the 20s, then you have the media, and then the media is going to glorify the negativity.
Well, I think that the media, I'm going to start by saying that they kind of put this division between children and their parents, especially as they go into adolescence. Like, you don't need your parents, and it's like, no, you do need your parents. You need boundaries, you need rules. And I want to say, because I I went through 12 years of Catholic school, so, and I was taught by superior teachers, which were the Sisters of Mercy, until I was in 8th grade, and then in high school by the Marist Brothers and the Marian Sisters. And I mean, even when my children went to public school, I was a kind of on top of them, but I could tell that if you really weren't, your child could very easily just go through school and not really learn well at all. And like you said, because I think a lot of people that went into teaching were not teachers. They were just there because, hey, it's a secure job and I'll get a pension. But they weren't like the teachers. Like I remember growing up that even the teachers that were not the nuns, because they had regular teachers. These were teachers. They loved to teach.
Right. And one of the things about, as you talked about, the pension, as the saying on over here is, it's a peel-it type of job, like you peel a banana, that kind of thing here. Yeah. And they're there, and I mean, you think to yourself, geez, this person can't teach. They're as smart as a box of rocks. They're just babysitting. And one of the bad things about the school systems here is they do not teach people to be analytical,
yes,
and they don't even teach them their constitutional rights, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and how important these things are.
Yes.
So that's how come you have people with these daffy ideas nowadays wanting to be so yourself. It just doesn't work, people.
No, and I agree. And I'm going to tell you something, and people don't realize there's people that you can be really intelligent and knowledgeable, but that does not mean you're a good teacher. Okay? But then, beyond that, then we get into what are, because usually most school systems have a program of this is what we're going to teach in this grade, and this is the lesson plan, in other words. And I hate to say it, but a lot of it is like substandard, for lack of a better word. And I'm going to use the A word. There's an agenda behind it.
Yes, exactly, an agenda behind it. And if you look at, as I said, the dumbing down of Americans, and that's how come you have, I said adolescents extending into their 20s. Yeah. They'll make it to their 30s, and that's what you have with people nowadays.
I have to laugh because people. I tell everybody when I was 16, by the time I was 15, that you could get your restricted, and you're 16. I was driving. I was like, I wanted to drive. I wanted to I didn't want to move out per se. I did eventually when I got married, but I was like, you were just wanting to be independent, okay?
Yes.
And now it's like kids are like. They're in their 20s. They like Uber me here and take me here. And I was like, man, what happened? I don't know. I made my kids, I told them, okay, they got their little car when they started going into at the end of high school. And I told them, you know what, you can stay here as long as you have a job and you take care of your costs. You don't pay me anything, and, you have to go to school and have a part-time job. And that's what they did. And it didn't hurt them. It did not hurt them at all. To have that responsibility, believe me. But yeah, it's that. I know. Believe me, I've heard of enough stories of. I mean, not what maybe a few months ago, that guy that was in his 30s and basically his parents had to evict him, and it was like, that's shameful. What is wrong with that picture? That people, I'm not sure if it's being afraid to make their way in the world. I just feeling as of entitlement, like your parents. I mean, your parents are always going to be your parents, don't get me wrong, but this belief that they're going to be obligated to take care of you till when? Till they die? It's like, what?
Well, yeah, but again, too, it's just not that guy. There's probably all kinds of things inside the beams of that family, and and his parents did not do a good job as far as telling him, this is the way it is. It's capitalism, baby. You're going to get your head handed to you many times if you go independent. Yeah. But once you get out there and you learn how to surf, oh, baby, or I should say, hey, baby, this is the best game in the world. And that's how come all these people without education try to come into this world, into this country here, because they say, geez, just through hard work, I can make it. And other people that are here, because of the dumbing down of the school system, is I want to be like Sweden. I want to be like, well, Sweden's falling to pieces, and they're going to be like Venezuela. And no, it just doesn't. It doesn't work that way.
Nearest garbage bin so I can find dinner. Thanks.
Well, I mean, look at you. You're Cubana.
Oh, let me tell you something.
Look at Fidel. Yeah, look
Allan,
at Fidel in Cuba.
If there's anybody that understands that very well, it's me and the experiences my family had. And I did not meet my father till I was 11 years old because of communism. So if there's, every time I hear some of the stuff, it's like, what a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
Okay, what a bunch of, I had some other choice words, but yeah, believe me, I understand it, and I've lived it, and I lived with the repercussions of it, and my family did firsthand. It's not like, oh, you see on the news, it's like, No, I understand very, very well. And let me tell you something, there's a lot of BS that's given out there. And let me tell you something, people have no idea the horrors that come with socialism / communism, because that's really where it ends up at. And that's why you have a lot of these European countries, which at one time were part of the USSR, are so stringently anti-immigration, like Hungary. You know that people from all these other different countries, like Germany and France, are immigrating to Hungary to live there. Okay?
Exactly. And the thing about that is once again, with the educational system of France, and now to a degree Germany, but in England, they have done a magnificent job in dumbing down their people.
Yes.
They don't know about the Renaissance. They don't know about World War II. The government has become the father, and now they're bringing these other people on in. Problems, and it's again too because they do not know their history, and the plan was, it was hinted at in some terrible novels that I had to read when I was a young guy, like 1984 or Animal Farm. But after a while, you see yourself, you know what? I understand what he's getting at now because it's happening in France, and they're trying to do it here in the USA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Originally, those were looked at as dystopian novels, like fiction. Yeah, of course.
But it was full of hints about what's coming our way, because the author who wrote it, and I guess what was his real name? Ripley. His pen name was, it'll come to me in a couple of minutes. But yeah, he was linked on into what was going on in after World War II. Yes. And this was kind of, how do you like to say, like a smoke screen with hints. Hey, this was down the road. And by gosh, it happened. Yep. And you say to yourself, well, come on, Allan, you're putting too much emphasis into it. No. You read different books, and you can see that this is the game plan for the future. Yes. Look at Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. Yes. Okay, game plan for the 1940s, and he wrote that in 1921 it was. Yeah.
People don't realize that, because people think that sometimes things that are set in motion, the end goal could be 20 or 30 years or even 40 years down the road, but they understand that it's a process. It's not like a takeover coup d'etat, like where all of a sudden somebody storms the whatever and it was a new government. No, it's a process, and they understand that that's the only way that they can get a population to be indoctrinated and to go along with it. And I'm not gonna go into the particulars of what I used to do before, but for the state. But I can tell you, Allan, that. Also, and I'm going to go to the adults, people are, I want to say the general population, start relying too much on the government to solve problems for them, including with their kids, okay? Yeah. Instead of, don't get me wrong, I understand that you need structure and government, and so society runs and everybody can be okay, but it becomes to the point where instead of people taking responsibility for themselves, for their family, for their children, they expect the government or some arm of the government, whether it's the police or whatever, to come and handle stuff for them. And it's like, no. By this, I don't mean vigilante. I'm talking about, for example, I would be in certain situations where people were calling police to, like, say, I need you to lecture my child. Because, let's say they had an adolescent that was totally out of control. Okay? And it's like, what is this? What do you mean? Call the police to lecture your kid or give them a talking to. You know. But let me tell you, this was very common. Don't get me wrong. I know that once upon a time, you would have some wild child or bad seed or whatever you want to call them that it's like, wow. But this is very common. People are accepting of the intrusion of the government to handle everyday things that you should be taking care of, for whether it's for yourself or somebody else in your family. And then, of course, then you pay the piper down the road when certain laws are made and you find all your choices have disappeared.
Well, yeah, that's true. You know, once we're talking about leadership and adolescents being parents who do not qualify as leaders, and once you got to bring on in the police to try to lecture, then you say to yourself, the game's on over, because we're pretty much close to it, because they've had such a bad upbringing with no boundaries and with no, ideas set into them about responsibility and, about the capitalistic system.
Yes.
And so we see that, and we see that with the breakdown with families, with people that are in prison, because if you look at a lot of the people that have gone to prison, I mean, they come from basically no foundation there, and it's easy to see how they got into the system, and once the system gets their hands on them, the system wants to make money off of them.
Let me tell you something.
Downtrodden.
Yes, I do believe that unfortunately we've been over-criminalized.
Yeah.
Okay, don't get me wrong. I totally believe in law and order. I understand it. You know, you need law and order to run a society. Okay, you're always going to have the outliers out there that they're not going to be happy with it, but okay. But we've also over-criminalized stuff where people get arrested, everything, and then you get a criminal record over stupid stuff, and then it impedes you from getting a decent job. I mean, it's like, and then at the same time, it's a mixed bag, Allan. As far as, you know, how it affects society down the road. And, you know, like I would say, you know, before, once upon a time, most police were really out to get the really bad guys. That's what they wanted to get. They didn't want to deal with stupid stuff, you know. They weren't out to give the regular citizen a hard time, you know, and maybe, traffic ticket, but police wanted to bust the real delinquents, the real criminals. Nowadays, people get arrested sometimes for stupid stuff. You know, like you said, it's over-criminalized, and then it follows you around. And like you said, they want to, of course, they get money out of the public. I'm going to give you a perfect example, like those the traffic lights with the cameras on them. Yeah. You know, like that people are being, it's like, man, all they think about, you know, is just pumping money out of the citizens, and that's not fair either. Okay. Yeah,
you know, big government needs money, and the thing that they want is they want more people into the system, so that they will be voting. Well, let's tell it like it is. Yeah. Most people that do work for the government are going to be voting Democratic. Yes. So you're going to have these type of, I'm not saying Democratic, Democrat. And with that, you are going to be having the system to be putting more and more people into government work. And that's, again, to going to a socialistic system where everybody works for Big Brother. And that's not what this country is about. It's about capitalism, about entrepreneurship, and you know, those that can go on out there and put the time on in and blood, sweat, and tears. I know that's a cliche, but that's what it takes to get a successful business going.
Well, you know what? And I think that if you have the drive and the initiative, you should be rewarded for it.
Exactly. And the thing about that is, why should I end up paying for somebody who's going to be Joe Lazy at the job while I'm putting in all these extra hours? And I'll just say this, because I think we have to get to the paranormal aspect here.
I know.
But this here is with my business, with my tours. I do tours and I write books. And you can get my books on Amazon, and my website is SantaFeGhostandHistoryTours.com. But if you go on my tours, it's not going to be here is where the ghost of Clyde Clucks was seen, this kind of stuff. You're going to get the inside information about the history of the area and what happened with the sighting, and also my insights on investigations that I got there.
Okay.
So you're going to get a lot of it's a very, how do you say, highbrow type of tour. It's something, and we've jumped into some.
Well, you know what? It's all part and parcel. We went from death cults to the effect on society.
Yeah.
But you know what? It all dovetails, because let me ask you something. It sounds like you're a self-starter. You told me that you have been doing these tours for how long, Allan?
Gosh, I'm going to say my first tour. Let's go back to, let's say, 1986.
There you go. Hello.
Yeah. And of course, I was doing research on this way before that. Not that I knew that it was going to. It was my own benefit, and of course, all this information that I interviews from some oldsters that lived during Wild West days, during the Santa Fe Ring days, the end of the this would be like the end of the Billy the Kid era, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I was able to talk to these oldsters and get all kinds of information from them before they passed on. And these people were in their 90s. And this was ages and ages ago, before the 1980s. So so with what I do, I'm very thorough. And so again, too, if you come to Santa Fe, look me up. I'm on the internet, Santa Fe Ghost and History Tours, or just Google Yahoo Al Pacheco Ghost Tours, and you'll see my website, and it's like 180 some pages.
I saw you got a gazillion pictures, and a lot of people send you pictures. I was looking at those testimonials.
There's pictures of people on my tours, people during. Sometimes people have got things on my tours. You can see ghost pictures, energy. Information on cattle mutilations that I've done, conspiracy, and again too, if you like that's because out there you've got a lot of ranching as far as out on the outskirts or in that area. Yes. Well, this is the old Wild West.
Yes. Let me ask you something. Have you stumbled across any older stories about cattle mutilations? Because we always think of it as something more modern.
Yes. Okay. Well, the media is going to say that the first mutilation happened in 1967.
Okay.
At El Rongo. The first mutilation happened in 1947, and this was just a few days before the Roswell incident.
Really?
And on July 3rd or July 4th, depending upon what archive you're going to believe, etc., a UFO, crashed outside of Roswell, New Mexico, and crash, was it shot down, was it hit by lightning? Okay, we don't know, but in essence, that's what happened. And you had, of course, the mothership, and it bounced. You had the two debris fields and the escape pod. Now, the thing about Roswell is why would a craft be over Roswell, New Mexico? This is because at that time, Walker Air Force Base was the only military base in the world that had atomic bomb capability. Oh. This was the Army Air Corps base. This is before it branched off to the Air Force. This was the base of the elite of the elite. These were the guys who dropped the bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Wow. This was the ultimate of military technology. So it makes sense that there would be a UFO over this Air Force, this Army Air Corps base, seeing exactly what are these people doing and what's the top of the line of their weaponry. Now, a few days before that, what was it, June 30th, etc., and I interviewed one of the last of those cowboys. There was this ranch west of Santa Fe, roughly by where the old C.D. Baca Ranch was, and this is minimum 12 miles on out, and they saw what they called back in those days a Foo Fighter. That's another word for a UFO flying saucer, and they went riding on up to this mesa that afternoon, and they came across a few cows that had been mutilated. Now these cows, this is the classic mutilation is, and we'll go through the decades here. The cow has 90% of its blood drained from it, its sexual organs removed. Sometimes the heart is removed through a tiny slit in the chest. There's no human footprints around the cow. There's no tire tracks around the cow. Whoever killed that cow killed the bovine without a struggle. And that's what we had on up there. So going back, 3 days later to the Roswell incident, years later, decades later, when some of the paperwork gets snuck out of the Pentagon, having to do with the Majestic file, the Majestic papers, they say that in the debris of that UFO that crashed outside of Roswell, they found autopsied tissue.
Oh.
So I am saying, got it there, Marlene. Sherlock Holmes, was that the autopsied tissue of those cows?
Exactly.
That were, because you look at where Santa Fe is compared to Roswell geography. As you know, they say it's a hop, skip, and a jump there.
Right.
And then you hope that it was bovine, that it wasn't human tissue, because there's some missing people, and that goes into what we say about UFO abduction. So so we're talking about this going back to 1947, this cattle mutilation. So it's not a phenomena that started in '67 or hit its apex in the '70s, or when the media was on it in the '70s. This has been going on, and go ahead, Marty. You got it.
Well, no, because I'm thinking, who knows how many other maybe cattle or even other types of wild animals were mutilated, but if there's nobody to find the remains if you find bones, how would you know what had happened to that animal? You might have thought the predator got them, they got sick. So
that's one of the canards that UFO debunkers or people, for example, associated with the government and their black ops are going to give you the red herring and take you off in a different direction.
Yes.
And they're going to say, well, you know what, this cow ate some poisonous greens and it died. And these ranchers do not know their trade. And they're thinking that this cow that died was abducted by aliens. Or it was abducted, but it was something to do with UFO activity. Now, mind you, go onto my website, SantaFeGhostAndHistoryTours.com. You're going to see photo after photo of cows that have been mutilated. And the thing about this is that these cows, the ranchers know their trade. And you go on up to one of these things, again, you say to yourself, there's no, where's the blood of this? I mean, this is laser precision type surgery on these cows here.
Yes.
And in some cases, sometimes on the hide of the cattle, there is hemoglobin. In other words, the iron has been separated from the blood of the dead beef. And sometimes these mutilations are out in the middle of nowhere, on top of crags, underneath trees. And in one of my books I wrote, for example, there was, and you can get my books on Amazon, Allan Pacheco. I got to plug myself on the show.
Well, no. I've been running. I have a slide with the covers of some of your most recent books.
Okay.
So people have been seeing it, Allan. But absolutely that they could probably link to your name and then find your books on Amazon as well, right?
Okay, yeah. And as far as, for example, they did this one experiment, I think it was, at the University of Wisconsin, and they ended up getting a beef on a state-of-the-art veterinarian laboratory, and they tried to do the mutilation that they found on these beefs out in pastures.
Right.
And after 8 hours of work, they had not been able to do what they found
they couldn't reproduce the incisions or none of that.
What they find out, with these cows there. Now, one of the things about this is the misdirection that you're going to find on TV is you're going to, and remember again, you're talking to somebody who's coming from experience of being a SAG-AFTRA actor. They'll get people and they'll say, these are your lines, and you're going to pretend for the camera, and you sell it that you're really interested in the mystery of cattle mutilation. Right. So you get these young people there, and they're going to be going all over this, and then at the end we've deduced that it was just that the cow decomposed by way of natural means, and that predators tore it on up. And again, too, that's all part of, how do you say, the throwing the tapestry on over you of not telling the truth. Now, there are some cows out there that have been hit by lightning or have been killed by a mountain lion, calf has been killed by a mountain lion, et cetera, or a cow that's been killed by a bear. But what I'm talking about are these other cows that, it's just beyond belief what's happened there. And again, too, there's been some other types of things that have happened. And again, too, this is more of the sleight of hand. For example, north of Santa Fe in the Dulce area, and some people say Dulce. Dulce is the correct way. You're Hispanic. We don't want to speak Spanish right now, but for the people that understand how to say the words. There's this area there that had a number of cattle mutilations in the 1970s. Now, some of these cows that were found were dropped onto fences or through trees, etc.
Yeah, like how did this thing end up there? Come on.
Yeah, and the thing about that is again too, it's to lead the media into a different direction. Then an investigator will say, "Well, hey, I just found a NATO mask, a gas mask, a U.S. Army mask, or Marine gas mask, or I just found some metal." Tinfoil pieces, chaff, what you're going to be doing to blind a radar unit when you sprinkle that for tactical airstrikes, that kind of thing. And that is being placed there,
right, to make it look like, the conspiracy theorists,
it's to throw the writer, the few writers that are covering this, say, you know what, this is all part of some type of top secret government experiment. Yeah. Well, no, it's not, because when having these cows being dropped from Huey helicopters or Chinooks or whatever that. But these other cows, no, that is not a government goings on. For example, let's just say since 1948, 49, because of the loss of cows, because they tend to go in waves, there's been rewards been put out there by rancher associations. In other words, things that are kind of like related to the 4-H group or to, syndicates. Saying, okay, we want to find out who is killing these cows. Right. Is it crazed World War II veterans from the Pacific? Then later on, it's got to be crazed Vietnam vets. Yeah. Then it's got to be demonic cults on out there. All of this time that they've had all this money on the table, they haven't found anybody going on out there and killing cows. And there's this one guy, and I know we're going into overtime, but let me just finish
the
story.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Keep going.
For example, there was this one guy. He was an ex-FBI man, and his name was Ken Rommel. Okay. And like Rommel the Desert Fox.
Yes.
But he wasn't brilliant as far as Rommel the Desert Fox goes. Well, maybe he was brilliant as far as being the spokesman for the government. All right. Now, he was an ex-FBI man. And he was, one of those type of square-jawed, outside linebacker type of builds, Coca-Cola machine type of fellow there. And he ended up doing his, 30 years with the FBI, and he was here in New Mexico, Santa Fe, and then he ended up getting a job from the government to investigate cattle mutilation. So this was like 1979, 1980.
Okay.
And he comes on out with this, I forget what it's called, Operation Cattle Mutilation. I got the text here and some footlocker of mine that he did. But this is just a rubber stamping of what he did, of what they're saying, that all of this is imagination, that there's no such thing as cattle mutilation, and that it is cows that have eaten poisonous shrubs, and that the predators have done this type of mutilation on these cows. And this man, he's passed on. Right. He was, gosh, I don't know, what's the name of that irritating announcer, broadcaster for politics on CNN?
Jake Tapper, Jim...
Acosta.
Jim Acosta.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, that type of personality.
Yeah.
And he would say, you mean you believe in little green men from Mars? You'd be very, very disparaging to anybody who would try to bring something on up. And I said, well, or if anybody goes up to him and says, well, have you been to one of those cattle mutilations? Well, I have my detectives working on this, etc. here. And I thought to myself, okay, this guy, he's in the loop. He's want to be like the Philip Glass, who's going to be paid by a subsidiary that's going to be coming on out of the the CIA or whatever. Black Ops has these civilian companies that are going to employ these people to shoot out propaganda.
They disguise them. And this is the thing: if you're a rancher and you make a living from ranching cattle, let's say from raising, you understand, you know that the risks, the normal risks that you run, whether it's predators or animals that fall sick, you know what's normal. So when you see something like a cattle mutilation, it's like, what is this? And also the number of them. It's like, okay, these people that do this for a living, this is what you do day in and day out. And some of them, I imagine their families have been doing it for many years.
For generations, let's put it that way. And let's go this. Okay, now bovine blood and UFO, and of course, if you go on my tour, and I do different tours. I do history tours, I do ghost tours, I do lectures. Mm-hmm. But if you want, for example, sometimes people ask me, "Hey, Allan, I know about the UFO activity outside of Santa Fe. Tell me about this." Well, all right. Well, bovine blood and it's linked to UFOs. Right away, you say to yourself, "There's no connection." I mean, it's like running 100 athletic event of running 100 yards and then going fishing. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
All right. So, but there is sense with bovine blood and cattle mutilation, because bovine blood, is the closest to human blood that there is. Really? It's closer than chimpanzee.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. So, if we're able, and I tell this on the tour at times, if we're able now with our technology to grow a human ear off the back of a lab mouse, well, if these aliens, you know where I'm going with this, are, let's say, 500 years ahead of us technology-wise, well, are they doing some type of hybrid with the bovine blood, with themselves, and with captured humans? Just, vanishing humans?
What if they're which is kind of like a horrible thing, but using artificial gestation for hybrid humans, but using bovine blood to circulate the gestational project, like an artificial womb, quasi, artificial, but at the same time it's actually organic.
Yeah,
you see what I'm saying? And maybe yeah, why not? I mean, this is just me stepping out there, but why not?
Yes, exactly. And the thing about this is that people. Well, let me back on up. You have gone numerous steps beyond what most broadcasters, and I do a lot of radio or a lot of podcasts too, that talk about how this is practical. In other words, on the Allan vine, I heard it on the grapevine, I heard it on the Allan vine, that and certain military, for example, hospitals, they're using bovine blood as kind of like a liquid hamburger helper for regular human plasma.
I could see that happening.
Yeah. So that's what we've got. So that's the link between, we're talking about cattle mutilation, and then the hint between the craft that crashed outside of Roswell and with the cattle mutilation in 1947, before the mutilation before the crash outside of Santa Fe, and then the link between bovine blood, human blood, and then now the big Megillah, the people that go missing because people vanish, and it's like something. They stepped into thin air, and people say, "Well, okay, they stepped into another dimension, or this is all bogus." Well, no, it's not. Now, maybe some people did step into another dimension, or something grabbed them from another dimension, etc. But it's also possible that people were abducted by UFOs, by aliens. We have too much evidence of this. Now, the national media won't give it any credence, but there's all kinds of evidence of people being, so long, that's the end of them, that were abducted by, well, aliens, Foo Fighter type craft.
Well, and this is the thing. Well, and you might think, well, I don't know the exact volume, but maybe you could just get more blood out of a cow than you can out of a human. If what you're looking is for volume, that's number one. Let's say if you're doing whatever it is. And people don't realize, Allan, like what you said, how many people go missing that nobody realizes that they're missing. Because if nobody reports you missing, guess what?
Right. Now, let me tell you something about when I was a young guy. I was, I used to work slaughtering cows, as helping at a butcher.
Right.
This is, and you said people do not realize, not at all, how much blood a cow has, and it's buckets full and buckets full, and and of course, what the human body has, what is it, 9?
I know it's got to be considerably less than
But again, too, that's where you want to go to get, say your for a lack of better word, and I've used this before, the liquid hamburger helper. Yep. And again, too, now you have these people that go missing, and people have seen UFOs here. When it does happen, there's UFO waves, and there's a place east of Santa Fe in the Pecos area, and of course the slang term for this is the Pecos Triangle, and it's a takeoff on the Bermuda Triangle there, where you live, where people disappear without a trace. But there's no ocean on over here.
Right.
And I'll just give you this one example.
Sure.
And again, this is on the website Santa Fe Ghost and History Tours. Okay. There was this fellow, his name was Mel Nadel. This is just, I'm just giving you one example here.
Okay.
And he lived here in Santa Fe. He owned a gym. He had a jewelry store. He was nobody's fool. He was happily married, had a teenage daughter, and he was a black belt in karate. And he kind of, he was. Okay, for those that go back many, many decades, he's going to look like what Terry Hanratty looked like back in the early 70s when he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not Terry Bradshaw, Terry Hanratty of Notre Dame. In other words, the Ringo Starr type of haircut. And so this is September, and this is what, let's say 7 years ago or so, 6.5, 7, or let's say circa 7 years ago. And his buddies tell him, let's go hunting up there by Elk Mountain. And they go on up there, and they camp about 20, 40 yards off of the dirt road there. And in that area, it's virtually impossible to get lost. I use the example on my tours of this. It's kind of be like northern Georgia. In other words, every mile you're going to have a field, you're going to have bicycle trails, you're going to have a barn. It's just impossible to get lost there.
Right.
Well, he tells his two friends, you go knock yourself out, get your game, I'm going to build a blind. If something comes on by, I'll take it on out. Fine. So they get back at dusk, and his vehicle's still there, and there's no mail. So they crank off some rounds. There's no response. So they get one of those big air horns, kind of like a mini foghorn, tanker type of horn. And again, there's no response. So they go to the ranger and then to the state police, and they organize this huge search. And I forget where it ranks as far as searches in New Mexico history, but it ranks on up there. It's one of the a big thing. This is just not only state police and family. You've got professional searchers, you got people on horseback, you got volunteers, and you go to my website, you'll see pictures, and you'll see me up there, and then later investigation on up there. Well, anyway, Santa Fe Ghost and History Tours, and they got tracking dogs, they've got Cessnas, they've got Huey helicopters. Those are going to be the ancestors of the Black Hawk helicopters, right. And the thing right away, this is the Twilight Zone aspect of this. Right away into the search, they find Mel's tracks, and they go roughly about 110 yards away from the camp.
Okay.
And they just stop. In other words, he does not go back on his tracks. There's no sign of struggle. There's no spirit casings. There's no bear prints, no mountain lion tracks around him. No, nothing. It's just as if you disappear into thin air. Mm-hmm. Now, this was, as I told you, let's say circa 7 years ago. Since that time, none of his accounts, and they had a lot of money in them, have been touched.
Right.
He was happily married.
Right. Exactly.
His no clothing, no bone has been found of this man. And that's just one example of what goes on out there.
Right, and this is the thing, because a lot of people, I understand some people do get lost, but a lot of these people that go missing are experienced outdoorsmen.
Yeah.
It's not like they're like wandered off and then they're like, oh, now what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
They're used to being outdoors, or they're either hunters, or like you said, plus the terrain is that you're either going to come across a trail or a barn or some place that if for some reason you had a moment and you became lost, you're going to find a way to be found or to come across somebody.
Right, and for those that are familiar with or a little bit familiar with the area that I'm talking about, there where he was at, to the south is Soldiers Creek. You just go down Soldiers Creek, you're going to get to the Pecos River. You're going to get to you're going to be passing by trails, roads. You're going to be cabins, civilization. You're going to, and then I'll go in another direction. If you go to the east, right up there, you have on this mountain that doesn't have any trees on it. There, you can walk it, you can hike it, you can take the trail on up there. There's the big repeater radio tower on up there.
Right.
And then at night, you're going to be able to see the lights of civilization where you're at. I mean, it's again, too, this is an area that is, how can you get lost? How can your remains not be found in that place?
Exactly. And let me tell you something, that story, that, or that scenario's played out a lot more than people believe. They had one here down in the 1940s. There was a very well-known jockey. His name was Al Snyder. And he had come down to South Florida because, they have a lot of horse races, or especially back then during the winter, because, they would winter down here because of the weather. And they would have the races down here in South Florida. As a matter of fact, in a racetrack, which is where I grew up in Hialeah racetrack. Anyway, he came down and he was a very famous jockey. As a matter of fact, he was supposed to be riding a horse that was going to go, that ended up becoming the Triple Crown winner, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and I forget the other one. But anyway,
Belmont.
The Belmont. He had finished riding that horse. He was like, and he had come, and he went with a couple of his friends to do right off the Keys. They were on a boat, and they row out a little bit to fish, like for a couple of hours, like a little skiff off the big boat. Which, by the way, everybody, I know it, off the Keys, it's very shallow. You could get out and walk, okay? And they went out there just to, basically, let's see what we could catch. The people on the bigger boat where they came from have line of sight of them. All of a sudden, dusk falls. A couple of people saw them, and they lose sight of them, and then they start thinking, okay, where are these guys? Long story short, the three men disappeared. They were like in a little dinghy, one of those little thingamajiggers. They couldn't this was, I want to say it was 1948. They couldn't find them. They were like, where did they go? They, back at that time, they started the next day, of course, setting up boats, airplanes, just to find them. And out there, also they have all these little islands where some have fresh water. And they were thinking, even if these guys capsized, you could basically walk out. Even if you couldn't swim, you could walk out. You could walk to shore, in other words. It wasn't like, hey, if you fall in the water, that's it. You're done for. They were within line of sight of the ship that had been on. I want to say a week later, they found their dinghy or whatever, basically stripped bare of everything that had been inside it. And one of these, what's called 10,000 Islands, which is on the west side of the Everglades, the one that empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. They never found them. They never found any of the three men. None of them.
Okay, now wait a minute. Now they found this small boat on the other side.
Well, no, they
Florida.
were, as you know what, when you go down Florida, you have the Florida Keys.
Yes.
And basically you're at the tip. You could go into the Atlantic. Or basically you got the Bay side and you've got the Gulf of Mexico when you're down in the Keys. You're looking on one side of it and on the other. And they were down in the Keys area. And just a little bit up on the Gulf of Mexico side, there's an area called 10,000 Islands, which is part of the western edge of the Everglades, kind of is where it's at. Like a week later, they found the dinghy there. And of course, it had been stripped bare of everything that had been in it. Incredible. They never found these guys. They never found them. Yeah. They didn't find any trace of them. They were saying they could have walked out even if they swam. There were these little islands where they could have like lived for a couple of days, till somebody found them. It's it's like they could. It's never been solved. What happened to them? Ever? And they were in line of sight, and they disappeared. And of course, it's never been explained. And they basically threw everything. And by the way, all three men, I think one of them was the manager, his manager. All three men were highly successful, very well off. None of them were into any problems where you would think, well, maybe they're trying to disappear. None. They were all at the height of their careers, making a lot of money. And he was on a little fishing trip because he had just finished doing a race here in South Florida, in Miami, in Hialeah. And that was the only thing they ever found of him, was that little skiff, that little dinghy. And as a matter of fact, the horse he was supposed to ride did go on to win, and that jockey was kind enough to give half of the purse, I think, to his widow. But sometimes people go missing under the most extraordinary circumstances that you can say, how could this happen?
Right.
And they do.
And this was Alf Snyder.
Al Snyder, yep.
Okay. Now I want to say something here, being that you're national, but you got a lot of people there in the Miami area and Fort Lauderdale area. Mm-hmm. Now there's one fellow, and if anybody has any information on him, you can go to my website. You can get my email address. And with the Flight 19, this was that flight that disappeared in December 5th, 1946, off the coast of Florida, off of Fort Lauderdale.
Right, the one that went out from Fort Lauderdale. Exactly.
There was one guy who was supposed to be on that flight. His name was Allan Krasner, I think his last name was Krasarner, something to that effect. And he had enough hours that he did not have to go on this flight. Now, was it because he had a feeling about it, or was he sick, or he just didn't want to, maybe he was going to get liberty. Well, he was in the Marines, but he was in the Navy. Maybe he was going to get off base early, or who knows what. Well, he didn't have to go on that flight. So he's the only one that did not disappear. And I've never been able to track down what became of this man. Really? And if anybody has any knowledge about that, or if he's dead and they know, okay, he told me this, or I'm his nephew or grandson, and this was passed on down to me that he had a feeling about this, or this is what he thought, please pass it on. Because Flight 19 is one of the most peculiar disappearances that there is. And for those that don't know about it, this was after World War II. World War II ended in August of 1945. In December of 45, these guys, they were in Grumman TBFs, torpedo fighter bombers, were doing a military exercise off of Fort Lauderdale. And it was a piece of cake. These guys, some of them had all kinds of combat experience.
And I believe the weather was also excellent, right?
Yes. Yeah, and 2,500 hours, and I think one guy had maybe the Navy Cross, all kinds of. They'd been under stress, under fire, and they do this flight. The flight ahead of them, because different sections take on off and do this exercise of navigation, and then dropping bombs at this hulk, like you said, in these shallow. And the weather ahead of them is fine. Everything's reported fine. They do everything. They're coming on back. And then all hell starts to break loose. They get lost. None of their compasses is working. Their radio, their transmitters, receivers are not working. They're trying to get their bearing on Fort Lauderdale, and they can't do it. Now, mind you, what are the odds of every airplane's compasses going on out?
Malfunctioning all at the same
yes.
time.
And then I'm sure that in their emergency kit, they're all going to have a compass on them. Mm-hmm. And none of them are working. Then, when you have this, none of their communication being able to work, well, then they can use the setting sun, because this is late afternoon, of where to go. Now, it's not too difficult to do that, because even if you have cloud cover, you're going to be able to see where the dark clouds are versus where you have the lighter clouds are. Even if there's a storm, you're going to be able to see that. Yeah. But yet, what they're able to get from this military air control tower is that these people are thoroughly lost, nothing makes sense, and you're saying to yourself, where are they flying to? What's going on? And then they don't hear any more from them. Now, when they were trying to vector and trying to get to clear up the static, when that would happen, and they start to hear the voices of these pilots trying to get some type of degree setting to head towards their Air Force base, something would come on and just cause all kinds of white noise onto the radio system there. Well, anyway, at a certain point they say, well, they've run out of fuel. We're sending on up this big search for them. I think it's the biggest search in southern Florida history. Yeah. Ships, planes, civilians, military, etc., and they don't find any debris, any bodies, nothing at all. But as this was happening, they had a rescue plane that could fly in the air. I think it had either two or four engines, and it was I think it was called the Flying Dumbo, and it was crewed by rescue personnel. And this plane had like a range of time element of 24 hours in the air, and it was designed to rescue downed flyers. Okay. And it goes on out to try to rescue these pilots. And there's on the TBFs, it's going to be a crew of 3. And instead of having 15, there's 14 because this Alan Krasner is not on that flight. And this other rescue plane is going to have maybe perhaps a crew of 8. In other words, it's going to be a big plane that's going out there to rescue them that can land on the water.
Right, exactly.
And this plane disappears too.
That's what people. That I think is the most fascinating thing.
Yes.
The rescuers disappear.
Yeah, and one of the things that is heard, and of course they say that it's coming from, well, depending on what archive you go to, they say that it's coming from the rescue plane, or then it's coming from the commander or the second in command of the TBFs that are lost. And through the crackle of the radio, it's heard, "Don't come after us. It looks like they're from outer space."
See, I never heard that.
Yeah. So you have that. Now, mind you, no wreckage of this other plane is ever found either, or none of the bodies of and that rescue plane. So when
now,
talking about the missing, yeah.
But you know that out in the Everglades, they've discovered planes that nobody has claimed prior, that there's no signage on them. They don't correspond to any missing planes. Okay. Mm-hmm. And before people go, "Oh, that's the drug trade," these were planes pre-drug, running here in South Florida. And where those planes came from, they found them out there in the Everglades, down to the Everglades. And they can't match them up. It's like, this plane belongs to who? How did it end up here? Nobody knows. Mm-hmm. So that's that incident that you're talking about. That's one of the most famous ones that that they attribute to things that have happened in the Bermuda Triangle, which is that there's no explanation. And I don't know if you've read recently, because you mentioned that thing about the compasses, which of course use that magnetic, pole, or the magnetic that magnetism in the Earth, and that lately they've been experiencing the magnetic shift, the magnetic pole shift, which is why they've had to issue new reports for GPS systems, which back then didn't matter because it was,
Right. Well, let me say something about that Flight 19 and Alan Krasner, or Allan, whatever his name was. Now, I wrote about this extensively in one of my books, but I almost want to say that I've got a question here, because his name is Allan Koznar. His last name is Kosnar, and his first name was Allan, Allen. Koznar, Kosnar. So if anybody has any information of what this guy said...
Was he a native down here? Was he living here, or was he just stationed down here?
He was stationed here.
Okay.
Now, one of the, but again, too, you just never can tell. I mean, who knows? I mean, if he was from Boston or from New York, maybe his uncle. Because so many people have moved on down from the Northeast to live in southern Florida.
Sure.
So the thing about this is that one of the stories. Now, I cannot validate this. Is that somebody took his place? Now, you say to yourself, well, who was that somebody? Who was number 15?
Right.
You say, well, okay, well, then that's going to say, well, that's just too much science fiction. Was this an illusion? Is this just too good a story? Or did somebody really take his place, and was that covered on up? Or who was this person, and was it, again, too, the mind spins on that.
Exactly, and of course there's nobody... there's nobody left to say one way or the other. And then, fortunately, back then, when this happened in those years, people knew when stuff was top secret, they kept it secret. It was like...
Yeah, and I think to myself about the Twilight Zone, was that one of the gremlins disguised, the old William Shatner show where you see the person out there on that thing out there on the wing.
Well, it's like, you look at that, which, by the way, that's such a great episode. It made such an impact because truly it was that when you step from your norm to the Twilight Zone kind of thing. But, what are the chances? And again, when you dissect that situation like what you just did, Allan, which is you have experienced airmen, clear weather. They're basically, because sometimes, for civilians, there's a delay in getting the rescue personnel out. But for something in the military, you know that it went out right away.
Yeah.
And they still can't find it. Nothing. No debris, nothing.
Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, a lot of this, people don't realize, not all the time, but a lot of this debris, it'll float right away. And I mean, nothing washes up. I mean, over here, we get weird stuff that washes up on the shores. Nothing ever washed up. Like, what happened?
Yeah, no life jacket, no oil slicks, no... okay, so this is 5 planes that went down. These are going to be single-engined, 3 crewed. These are big torpedo fighter bomber planes, TBF, Grumman's. This is the kind that President Bush #1 flew in World War II, and so that people that have anything, that know anything about the presidency, they'll say, "Oh, now I know what kind of plane this is." Not that I'm
right. No, but in other words, I know what you're saying. This is not like a little Cessna, that's like a little tin can, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, and I'll just say this: not that I'm a fan of President Bush #1, but okay. So, yeah. So, but and this other plane that goes on down, again, too, it's going to be a large plane. It's going to be 2 to 4 engine. And I guess it would be maybe 2 engine, and it has the floats, and it goes down. And again, too, no wing struts, no life jackets, no nothing, no. Yeah, so that's again to beyond belief. That's
one of those things that people could say, well, with no evidence to the contrary. It's like, I mean, where did they go into the never? Yeah, possibly. I mean, I'm sorry, but I mean, things people don't realize when stuff goes into the ocean, things like I said float or end up washing ashore. I mean, ask anybody that lives along beaches some of the stuff that will wash ashore eventually. The tide will bring it in.
Yeah.
And for nothing to ever come ashore, believe me, that speaks volumes right there as to that something happened, and it wasn't like the most likely, which is that they crashed into the ocean, and that was it. I don't think that's what happened to them.
No, not at all. No, something they were taken, and who knows what. If it was something that they came on portale, doorway, something came on out, took them, or one of them flew on in. Who knows what? But again, too, this is not having.
Well, and there's a lot of people. Maybe they have. Maybe there are doorways that open. Maybe there's what they call just rips. Okay, where, like what you said, basically they're at the right, well, depends how you look at it, the wrong place, the wrong time, and basically they slip through that rip, or maybe that doorway was open for something else to come to this side, and it was, again, wrong place, wrong time, and it's almost like they just, that is one of the hallmarks, displacement of magnetic poles, all the stuff that normally, all the laws that apply to this dimension, all of a sudden do not apply. Maybe it's for just a few minutes, but then that's all it takes.
Well, again, too, let me throw something at you here and to the audience. Okay, now I agree with you there, Marlena, about sometimes people are there at the wrong time and they fall through something, or something opens on up, or something comes out and gets them, or they're target of opportunity by E.T. or something. Right. However, is it possible that some people are tracked because they have a certain DNA or they have a certain mental capacity? Because UFOs, and I've noticed this here with the UFO waves that we've had on over here. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes you can see a UFO out in the middle of nowhere, and you can say, okay, maybe the person that I'm with, or some rancher or another rancher, there's only going to be 4 people that are going to see this UFO out in the middle of nowhere. Or again, too, you say to yourself, maybe there's constant times where nobody's going to see a UFO. Now, on other times, some of these UFOs are seen there over or by old Route 66. And you say to yourself, well, why did that UFO go on over this city, or why did it go on over or flank this major highway? And I use the old route because everybody knows about old Route 66. Now it's a different name, I-25. But the point being about that, well, why did it go on over that? Was it looking for someone?
Yeah. And that, yeah, you know what? And that when you start going, and then when we're talking about DNA, then of course we're talking about hybrids or genetic, where they've been tweaking with genetics.
Yes.
Our DNA, and let me tell you something. I mean, we could go into that there's what they call the use of the CRISPR, which is what scientists nowadays do so that they can tweak genetics, and their excuse is that they're trying to basically get rid of genetic diseases, but it makes you wonder, maybe somebody was working on our DNA for some, in other words, doing something, then putting us back in place. I mean, it could be bloodlines. I've heard of that as well.
Yes.
And unfortunately, nobody wants to be thought of as a laboratory experiment. But I mean, I have heard theories that there is more than one type of extraterrestrial that is, for lack of a better word, monitoring. Some of them just observe, and others are manipulative as to...
I agree with you there. And there are different species on out there, and some are not warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, not ET phone home.
And they do not want our... they're not there for our best interests. Some are, how to say, just neutral. Maybe one... maybe two will, how to say lay off of these primitive humans,
right.
And maybe they have like a, how to say, some type of, well, I hate to say prime. Well, I don't want to. Well, I start to say prime directive. I hate that because we can go in, because that's another guy, Roddenberry, and the Nine that and Roddenberry and Star Trek and the propaganda of that. But they have some. They're watching us, or maybe they're protecting us from some of the most insidious beings.
Yeah.
And others, they just want to roll dice with us. There are many different species on out there that are doing this, and if you look at the different craft that have been seen. And here's something that's kind of interesting about, okay, is it a new craft, new beings? But the classic cigar-shaped, we don't see that too much anymore.
Okay.
Now what we do see is if the cigar is going to be flattened like a wafer with maybe some bumps on top of it. So that's, you say to yourself, is that a new craft of one species, or is it a different species? We've been seeing these tube-shaped craft for I don't know how many decades. And we've got the saucers, all kinds of things here. So again, to what we were talking about at the beginning of the tour about different ghosts, different aliens, well, we got Fiats, we got Ferraris, we got Chevys, Fords, we got all of these different companies on out there that are, well, again, too, for lack of a better word, playing dice with us.
Well, and I mean, if you really let's go out on let's go down that bunny hole. I mean, with some of the work and that I did with spiritual attachments, and some other doctors have stumbled across it under hypnosis, where the attachment is non-human. It's, as a matter of fact, it's extraterrestrial. They have run across that. Okay, and you have two versions of it. You have an attachment, which is a spirit attachment. It's just that it's from an extraterrestrial, or the attachment is purposely and knowingly an extraterrestrial that is like a parasite on the human host. In other words, it's not spiritual as in something that passed on as a spirit. In other words, it's an active, intelligent, living, for lack of a better word, extraterrestrial that is basically using the human being as a host, and they're doing observation being part of the body of that person. I mean, and that's a whole different other show. But in other words, I guess the idea is that sometimes we want to think of extraterrestrial strictly in the sense of three-dimensional like us, but we really don't know what their capabilities could be.
Well, yeah, well, I want to say something about that. And when we're talking about what you talked about, extraterrestrial, okay, now I will agree with you to a certain degree on that as far as some type of being inhabiting certain human beings as far as the human bloodline goes. And that's when we get into the Illuminati and, for example, alien, is it demonic, is it alien,
right.
That kind of thing here. And then again, too, with other types that some people say, well, that is alien entity. I'll disagree and I'll say, no, that's a different form of demonic that you have not come across. For example, with the lost science, the lost arts, and we're going to go back to between, Assyria and Atlantis, after Atlantis and we were destroyed, or with what some of the things of Zechariah Sitchin has to say about Sumeria. Mm-hmm. But remember the chimeras, the legends, the lore of that. Half part lion,
right.
With a human head, with wings.
Right.
Were these the bodies that that were built again with science that were given to the Assyrians or to the Assyrian?
Right, which is think of the movie The Island of Dr. Moreau, where they were like
so that you had these basically dummies or chimeras, so that you would have this entity, this energy, mm-hmm. be it ET or negative demonic being, come on in and inhabit that chimera. And that's what you're looking at. And it's very, very interesting. When you go into the bloodlines of some of these people that control this world, you say to yourself, my gosh, look at how they're always inbreeding with each other.
Yes.
And it's always, and people say, well, that's to keep the money inside Los Familias. Well, no. It's more than that. And talking about the blood, and if you go into the ancient kings and talking about the bloodline and how important that is, so you don't want to, as we get farther and farther away from, having these certain characters in our history having been, half alien or having alien DNA in them, mm-hmm. As it gets thinned on out, they want to try to, beef it on up by having these families interbreed with each other to keep that alien line in there.
Some of these families, they were basically risking sometimes genetic diseases, like the Romanovs. That's why the young prince, the one that was killed, he had, oh my God, this thing where you bleed. Oh, I'm drawing a total blank. Where you can bleed very easily. Oh my God, I can't believe that I'm drawing a blank. But, a lot of those diseases sometimes are from too much intermarriage among the same bloodlines. I mean, they were willing to risk that, is my point. Just to keep it within the family, knowing that there was a danger.
And remember, a danger. But remember, with these bloodlines and the way that they are, or these ruling families, you look at how they rule. And they rule through the monetary system.
Oh, of course.
And again, too, that goes into the political system. I mean, remember Thomas Jefferson said, it doesn't matter if you have a strong army. With the way things are, I'm paraphrasing, mm-hmm. How you control a country is through its banks, through its monetary system. And we see what's happened in the past. And we see that what happens with, well, it's not happening now, but I mean, it's what's happened in the past with different USA presidents who are just basically puppets of Wall Street, who are, in other words,
I think that's
you
know what? I think that now with the internet and the dissemination, or the ability to disseminate all this information, because a lot of people are going, oh my God, it's like, it is a disagreeable truth.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, let's face it, you do feel like you are, for lack of a better word, like part of the matrix. You, as much as you think you have free will, or you there's a lot of your life that's being manipulated, or the circumstances of your life. How's that?
Well, I'd say this: we got free will, but again, you got to get that free will. You got to snip the cables of the puppet masters that control you.
Yes, but you know what? I want to tell you something, Allan. That requires people wanting to be responsible for themselves, and a lot of people are afraid of being responsible for themselves.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're very
and that
scared
goes back
of that.
to the dumbing down of the people. Yeah, the sheeple. Yeah. And
people are afraid of they'd rather say, well, if you're going to keep me safe and secure, and I don't have to worry about things. It's like, yeah, but you're giving a lot in exchange for that, a lot.
Mm-hmm. And that's not what you're put here for.
No.
You're not put here to be part of the beehive.
No. I think that we're here to engage in life and make mistakes, and life is messy, and you keep on doing, and some things work out right, and some things don't work out. But you're ultimately responsible for the good and the bad, and that's the way. We're not supposed to totally live perfect lives, because that's not what we're here for.
We're here to grow our soul, and through experiences and through what we do, we're going to be able to grow that the soul of ours. And as you say, what they're doing now is as far as being taken care of. Well, again, then you are just being the Walking Dead.
Right. No, people, unfortunately, and part of, I'm not going to say it is, because there's more to it than that, but it's the numbing of sensations. When too much drugs and everything, basically you numb yourself out of stress, of caring, of worrying, of it's like of life. Basically, in the end, that's what it becomes. Especially when you think all my needs are going to be taken care of. It's like,
well, that's a better way of saying it. Is that because with drugs it'll go a different way. But yeah, when you get into a system where all my needs are going to be taken care of, then again with the energy of these people, and when you're around them and you have that, it's completely different as compared to somebody who's going to be out there doing something on else and being owning his own business. Sure. It's just and again too, we can go into vibrations about that and colors, but we don't have time for that. But yeah, you're on the right road there. And again, I just want to say something on else about what you talked about, the very unpleasant truth about control and about who is in leadership. Not right now. I mean, I'm talking about previous presidents.
Sure. And
you look at how well they were. For example, you put Trump in a different category, but you go back to Obama, you go back to Bush number 2, to Billy Jeff Clinton, Bush number 1, going all the way back to Ford. I mean, these guys were the lackeys of Wall Street, of, in essence, the corporations. And when somebody went against them, like, for example, with JFK, what happened? He gets assassinated.
Well, I was about to say, being president of the United States, it's considered that you are one of the most powerful persons in the world. But people don't realize that, not really. I think that I'm going to use that word, the deep state or shadow players that really are the ones that have the reins of power. And they don't come and go every 4 years, in other words. They've been there for a long time.
Yeah, but now, as you said, it's being exposed, and we finally got a president who's talking about it and talking about media manipulation and calling it like it is, the fake news. And, gosh, I mean... for example,
let me tell you something. It's like people was like, I'm telling you, you think it's like, why can't you just tell me what's happening? Don't give me your opinion. Just tell me what's happening. Period. Stop.
Well, no, we got a lot of Goebbels out there that are Joseph Goebbels, who are going to give the company line for the deep state, and it's maddening if you're. Well, I guess it's if you're. You got to get to the point where you say, I don't want to be I cannot get my Radio Moscow, my Radio Havana type of propaganda from CBS or ABC or NBC anymore. But one of the bad things about that is they're trying to now control the internet, so that if somebody starts trying to tell it like it is, they're going to shut you on down because it's not PC, politically correct.
You know, the only thing about this, Allan, is that I think a lot of people who normally had their heads buried in the sand are going, wait a minute, what's going on here? People that normally would not pay attention to this are going, what? And it's like, yeah, thanks. I'm glad you're paying attention because we're about to go off the side of the precipice. Hello, everybody better wake up.
And I'll say this, I'll say this because your family's from Havana, from Cuba, and about what's like the Second Amendment. Well, what did Fidel do? Okay, he takes everybody's arms away from them so that they cannot fight the bad guys. And that's what the Second Amendment, what they're trying to do here in the USA. And like you said, hello.
I mean, and people don't realize, you know, when a lot of people say, oh, because, you know, the people that are now, that call themselves socialists, we're not communists. And Fidel didn't call himself a communist until he was very well established.
Exactly.
He was even questioned about it, and he denied it.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's let me tell, and in the end, even after he took power, he kind of slaughtered just about all the supporters he had within the military and infrastructure that had put him in power. He found ways of decimating them. I mean, it wasn't just people that were against him. These were people that had supported him. Along the way, he ended up assassinating a bunch of them. Because it was you know my secrets, you know this about me. He, you know, total socio-psychopath. People don't realize how there are no. Let me tell you something. There's no gratitude there. There's no thanks for helping me get in power. They eat their own. In other words.
Yeah, that's what dictators do. You look at Mao. You look at look at other dictators, Joe Stalin, how are we going to say his name? And for example, Lenin, who started it all, who took him on out? Good old Uncle Joe Stalin. Or the machinations of that there. Very, very strange how Lenin died there. And I say Uncle Joe's because some of these idiots will think of him as you know, that's what FDR you would call, good old Uncle Joe, he's doing this, he's doing that. Well, I mean, okay, he's fighting the Nazis, but I mean, I would never dare call him Uncle Joe.
Exactly. And, you know, and a lot of people make the mistake, Allan, of saying, well, and I'm going to use Cuba again as an example. When Batista was, you know, he was a dictator, but in other words, he wasn't voting, but still. Oh, yeah, they had a lot of problems, corruption, and, you know, they had the casino, but it was stuff that could be worked out. You know, in other words, it wasn't perfect. It was far from perfect. Okay. My family was middle class. My mom was a secretary. Like I told you, my grandfather was a retired policeman. My grandmother was a housewife because, you know, that was in Cuba. Once you got married, it was very rare that the woman was working. You know, you were a housewife. In other words, it wasn't because we had money. There was a middle class, and yeah, it wasn't perfect, but things could have been worked out. And what happens is that they work with the people that basically are disaffected. That's why, you know, most of the Cubans, especially those first 10 years between 1960 to 1970, they fled. The brain power. These were the people. And I'm going to tell you something. My grandfather, he was what they call, towards the end of his life, he was like a vice cop. He had been there for many years, and he would dress like undercover. He was like an undercover, what they call vestido paisano, which means he wasn't wearing a uniform. And this was a few years before Fidel, but when there was already rumors, when they were planning bombs, terrorism. And he had some where they would actually put him, let's say, under people's porches. And he came across people that told me one time, one lady, her legs got blown off, and they would accuse that it was the Batista government that was doing it, and it wasn't. It was them, but they do that. They do that, you know, that what they call the we doing it, but we're blaming the other guys. And he later on, he told me after he had come over here, because he had retired at the end of right towards the end of the 50s. Like when he had that beat, you know, what once upon a time where you had beat cops where they knew everybody, they knew they knew the robbers, everybody knew them. And he says that later on he found out that one of the neighborhood delinquents, they had made this guy the chief of police of that area. How does that go? And that's what happens. You end up putting people in power, which are the last people you should give that position to. Okay. And that's how, of course, I mean, that's a whole nother story as far as what happened to, and that's why the Cubans fled the way they did. Okay, because once they realized truly it was like, and people don't realize if once it got out that you were going to go to the United States, they would tell, if you had children going to school, and I'm talking about elementary school kids, regardless, you would be ostracized from your classmates, and the teachers would instruct the other two students to call you a worm in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they punished even children.
Yeah.
For wanting to come to the United States. People really have no idea how horrible what is involved in all of this. Okay,
yeah.
They're only seeing the free stuff, like they say, and getting all your things met, and I don't have to worry about where to live, and until nothing belongs to you. By the way, when you were going to leave, they would say, okay, this house first, and I'm going to give you another example. My father's family, they lived out in the country on the other side of Cuba, and they had always had farmlands. They had always had cattle. They farmed everything. When they took over, they came and they told them, we will allow you to keep your house. You may live here, belongs to the people, and you will farm this the way we tell you accordingly. Okay, in other words, we're going to let you, be nice enough to let you stay in the people's house. By the way, when you were ever going to leave your house anywhere, they would come and take inventory to make sure you weren't taking anything, because none of this belonged to you. This belonged to the government, to the people. Okay? So people have no idea what really, it entails living there. I mean, people are seeing, let's say now what they're seeing in Venezuela, people, going through dumpsters trying to find food. Okay, that's just right now the implosion. There's another thing involved with actually living under a communist rule for years and years and years. You would have somebody living on the block watching whatever. Who was that came to your house? So and so. Hey, you know what? They didn't give out meat this week. Why do I smell meat cooking in your house? And people are thinking, oh, that's BS. That is the truth. That is the reality of living under this type of totalitarian rule. Yes, this is what it leads to. But they don't tell you that up front. It's only when that it's too late that you're like, what in the hell like you said, you're not armed. If you become a dissident, you get picked up, they knock on your door pre-dawn hours, and your family never sees you again. And nobody knows, are you alive? Are you dead? What happened to you? Things like that. People don't remember. There was, you remember, Allan, before the Berlin Wall came down, how they would have people from Russia and stuff like that, and USSR defect, like, athletes and different people that whenever they would come on tour, they would defect.
Yes.
It's like, people think, why would you, if this is so wonderful, why would you need to defect? Especially if you're somebody that is held in high regard, whether you were a dancer or sports thing, your life was pretty sweet. Why would you need to do that?
Yeah, like Baryshnikov and Nureyev and all these others that defected. Yeah. And you say to yourself, well, okay, if you're at the top of the food chain, why are you doing this?
Yep.
Yes. And again, too, one of the things about this is you say to yourself, humans are different. You're going to have some people who are going to be lazy, and you're going to have others that are going to be producers.
That's the
and
human
why
condition.
should I end up getting paid the same amount, and I'm doing much more hard work than this person here? It just doesn't work that way. So those people that say, hey, I can make my bones in this country and live a good life. I don't want to live in slum area with electricity being dim and only X amount of food. I'll take my chances and I'll cross the strait and let me see if I can get to Miami.
But you know what? And that's the thing. It's a human condition also, Allan. You're going to have people that, like you said, they aspire to more. They want more. And I think this is one of the best things about the United States, where, regardless, you knew that your children have possibilities of doing much better than yourself, whatever. And you're going to have people that their nature, their personality, okay, or they're just content, like they're laid back, like you said, they don't care if they have to live in a tent, and that's fine. Hey, you don't want to kill yourself and you want to live in a shack, go ahead. But like you said, we need to reward the people. But if your nature is different for whatever reason, just because you're ambitious, because maybe your background or your childhood was poor, and you're like, hey, I don't want this for myself and I don't want it for my kids, and you're willing to bust your butt, why can't you say, hey, I'm willing to do what it takes? And hey, to each their own. You know what I'm saying? It's always been that way. You know, if you want to live in the shack, live in the shack. Live on the mountain. Well, live in the cave. Good. And
well, okay, to a degree, because with that there, I'm going to be like the Ferengi and the laws of acquisition. I say, okay, to each his own, but you're not getting any of my money.
Oh, no.
I'm not going to support you. Now, as far as, because I have libertarian ideals about this, but I'll say this, okay, now if somebody is strapped, etc., and they have a mentally handicapped, well, then the government's got to step in and help for the blind, etc. here. But as far as it being the handout system, and that's what they're trying to, well, not right now with this administration, but with other administrations, to turn it into the handout administration, handout, I should say, society, that's no good. And again, too, that's what previous administrations have tried to, plant that seed in American society of it being a handout society.
Well, you know what? I think that, you're going to have a segment of your population which sometimes temporarily needs a little bit of help. That happens. You lose your job, okay, and then you go and you get another job. And then you're going to have a segment of your population, like you said, that through some disability, something that they need permanent help. And I think that our governments up to a certain point account for that. Like, we know that this comes with having a society, but that's different from like people that have no business. Like you said, if you want to be a person that makes the works the least because you have no ambition to go any further than living in the one-room shack, go ahead. But why are you going to punish the person?
It's not one-room shack. What it is, it's going to be Section 8 housing, and that's not correct, because then you're saying to yourself, hey, listen, you're really bending the rules on that one here.
Yes.
This is for people that want to get ahead, that are having a hard time, and but no, you are you've made this a career.
Yes, and you know what? I've heard, for example, some of the shelters. Usually I believe, not all, depends. I'm talking about local ones here in Miami that I know of, that normally if you went there, you would go there for, basically, they gave you like a limitation of certain X amount of months. In other words, 6 months, I think it was, so that you could get yourself together. But what would happen is people would end up being there years, okay? Because let's face it, if I don't have to worry about paying for a roof over my head, okay, and when I have children, before you knew it, a couple of years had gone by, and they would still be in the shelters because there was no inducement whatsoever to move on up, to better yourself even just a tiny bit, so that you're just independent. We're not going to say you're going to move into the penthouse, but God, and it's unfortunate, but the nature of some people is that if you don't push them out, like, fly, little bird, fly. They're not. They're not.
Yeah. Well, again, and I'll just say this here so I can clarify. Now, there's some people out there that are mentally disturbed.
Yes,
and they say, well, how come you don't get a job, and how come they're homeless? Well, it's because they're mentally disturbed.
Yes,
and America, the government should take care of these people that are just gonzo. However they got there, because of too much drug abuse or because of their family background, etc. They're just you got to help them. But other people that, as I said, this is a career, and they're going to be Section 8 for the rest of their life, and they're going to pass on that type of idea to others. No, that's no good. That's not what this is about.
No.
And again, too,
this
that
is the
goes
thing.
back to
a lot of people
think
of like, oh, there's no compassion. Yes, there's a lot of compassion. There's a lot of compassion, especially for people that absolutely that in a way they don't have a choice. They have some type of disability, whether it's mental illness, some type of physical disability that they just can't, that they need that help, whether it's housing or whatever. And it's not like a temporary thing, like, hey, you know what, in a year this will be over. And I think that's what I'm saying. I think all governments understand that that there's a portion of their population that just falls into that. But there's another part which is like, I'm gonna go real quick into the segue. You know, this recent debacle of when they were these rich families that were trying to get paying their kids into these Ivy League universities, and where they were faking even their children having learning disabilities in order to get them easier tests or longer testing times. And I hate to say that, but if people think that those were the only circumstances where sometimes people fake either illnesses or for themselves or for their children, no. No. That happens quite a lot, especially if, and I'm going to give you a perfect example. If, let's say, you are on some type of benefits and you get X amount for your child, you will get extra money for that child if that child is diagnosed with some type of learning disability or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
And then that's we could do a whole nother show on that, Allan.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, one of the things about that is for example, the one that that really irritates me on that is that senator who claimed that she was American Indian. And I forgot what her name was.
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren here. Now, mind you, I know... I am. I told you at the beginning I am my lineage. I'm a Spaniard and an American Indian, and for her to go and do that, and then for her to not be forced to resign, that's incredible. Yes. And there are other people that are on the reservation or that are wherever you want to call them, and they rate help a heck of a lot more than Elizabeth Warren, who just used that lie to get ahead.
Yes, and people don't realize that. To be perfectly honest, I'm surprised that more tribes did not like. I mean, I would be upset. Because I would be like, wait a minute, because as far as I understand, I mean, I know different tribes have different standards, but if you want to claim alliance, or in other words, you have to prove that you have direct descent, that you are part of that tribe. In other words, okay, you have to provide paperwork. I have a good friend of mine. She lives out in California, but her family's originally from Oklahoma, and they're from the Choctaw Nation, and she was explaining to me she's always been very active in all the Native American affairs, out where she lives at and everything. And she was explaining to me, you got to basically prove that you do have the ties to that tribe that you're claiming. You just can't say, oh, well, I'm like what she said, I have high cheekbones. What is that? It's like I'm surprised I didn't hear more tribes like say, like basically make an outcry against this, because that's not right. It's not.
And here's this person, and she wants to now. Did she declare candidacy to be president?
I believe I don't know if she went beyond the exploratory. When they start thinking, well, am I going to do it? But I believe she did. I believe she's in the running. And I think what was telling was that I believe that surfaced when she was applying in Texas for the bar, and she listed herself in the application as being Native American, and the university I can't remember which university, one of the big universities, was considering one of the first women of basically of Native American heritage to be accepted. It's like, she's not. It's like,
I
just very embarrassing.
Cut off a piece of my hair, and in this little strand of hair, I have more Indian, more Native American than she has in her whole entire body.
Exactly, and it's like, and what I'm saying is that it's like, okay, you basically, like I said, I can't understand why Native American tribes, there's more of a bigger outcry, because basically they're using that identity for somebody that doesn't deserve it at all. Okay,
well,
to open
here's
doorways.
something on us about using identity as far as the Ivy League schools. You look at these people that ended up paying, gosh, what was it? How many tens of thousands of dollars to get into a school there?
Let me tell you
and I
something.
mean, their parents are, $30 million, $50 million that in minimum that they have.
Something.
And you say to yourself, geez, Louise, how shallow are these people to, I mean, if they had put that money into getting their kid would not be able to start a business to begin with. I mean, it'd just be wasted because of apparently, but I mean, if they had thrown that money to the kids and said, oh, you go start a business, but nevertheless, and this is the hierarchy that you're looking at that ends on up in the media, in filmdom, in government. They go to these schools and they say, well, because I got an Ivy League education or I went to this West Coast university that is the elite, I know better.
But can you imagine the fallout from this, Allan, that you were one of these people, whether deservedly or not, that you got a degree from one of these places? How much is that degree worth now? A lot less, I'll tell you that much.
Well, I don't know, because remember, you go on in there because you want to be with the kids from Union Carbide or from, the Rockefeller type of thing here. So it's a different type of mafia, La Cosa Nostra.
Yeah.
Or,
Well,
I
no,
know
they
have
have
more
those,
respect for those guys than I do for these people who, I'm from, I went to Harvard, that's what they'll call it, or Yale,
right.
Harvard,
yeah,
Yale.
Of course, because it's like you're guaranteed the prestigious, job.
And you look
whatever.
at our leaders and where they've come from. Yes. You look at, Obama, Bush, Billy Jeff Clinton, and talking about Bush number one, on and on, from these schools there, and you say to yourself, what's the connection here? Again, too, it's amazing. Oh, anyway, listen, Marlena, I'm going to have to wrap this on up. I had a wonderful time here with you.
You got to come back, Allan, because we got a lot to talk about. We do. We got a lot to talk about.
We got to get back to more of the paranormal. Okay,
yes.
we'll do conspiracy next time. How's that?
Absolutely.
We started on this.
It has been great to speak to you. Okay, and I'm going to be getting in touch with you soon to bring you back, and we can, man, there's so many things we could talk about. I'm telling you, it's endless.
Right, yeah, because you already done 2 hours, and again, too, with my gigs and stuff like this.
Sure,
yeah.
I understand.
Okay, well, all right, let me just say this before I go. That's Allan Pacheco, Santa Fe Ghost and History Tours, or Google or Yahoo, Allan Pacheco or Al Pacheco. You'll get to my website, and it's filled with all kinds of paranormal information, UFO, ghosts. If you're in town, Santa Fe, you want to do a tour, history, paranormal, I'm your man. If you need a lecture, again, I'm your man. And in my books, you can get them on Amazon.
Perfect. And by the way, like I said, I'm going to have a link to your website on the credits of the show.
Okay. All right.
All right, darling. Take care.
Que te vaya bien. Bye-bye.
Bien. Bye-bye. Adios. Oh boy, we went all over the map on that one. We didn't even talk that much about ghosts. I hope you liked it, because you know what? They had talk about and well, I guess also because, and we would, before we started recording, we were talking about, and I asked him, how long has your family been out there, and he was like, for generations. And when you mean generations, and he goes, I can, I've got my European side of the family, which I can trace them back to the 1500s, Pilgrims and St. Augustine that we have here in Florida, and I have Native American side of the family, which has been here before even that. And I said, well, then you definitely know the real scoop on, because when people live in an area, like your family, in other words, has lived in an area for a long time, you know the skinny, you know the truth, not the hype or what goes on or what is published. You get the real stuff about what goes on or has gone on in that area. And like he said, he's been doing the tours for 30 years or at least. And I'm going to have to bring him back so he could tell the stories about all these places, because I'm sure that a lot of these places, like we were talking, the experience he's had firsthand and people that have gone with him. And if it's true, when you go to Allan's website, you see a slew of photographs that people on the tours have sent him about stuff they photographed, like when you look at it after the fact, things that they've found that they photographed on their tours. Excellent tours. You could tell just by looking at the pictures, how basically those pictures are like testimonials. And he's very knowledgeable, and you can tell he does different tours, and absolutely he can, I guess depending on, what floats your boat, he's going to have a tour about it and knowledgeable. And like I said, I've gone on different tours in different places, and the ones I truly enjoy are the ones for people that really know the history. Even if it's a ghost tour, the history, the behind the scenes information that you never see in a history book, or never made the paper, or, is out there in the public. This is like, hey, the real story on this, the backstory on this event, or this family, or this building, or this haunting is blah, blah, blah. And people like Allan are the ones that fall into that category because they've just been around. And like he was saying, he, when he got into this in the 80s, he was able to speak to people that had lived out there, these old cowboys that he was saying that basically they were like on their last legs, the 80s and the 90s. But let me tell you something. At that age, you're going to, it's like maybe stuff that you haven't said before, you're going to say it. And I'm sure he's got a treasure trove of information from firsthand accounts because, sometimes a lot of stories, or whether they're true or not, they get lost in translation, from one person telling the other, and then by the end result is not what the original story was. So, but when you get it from, in other words, from the horse's mouth, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff. And, normally I don't, I don't talk about, conspiracy theories and things like that. And, usually because the paranormal, I want to say that the paranormal is almost like it's a non-political subject. If you look at it from that point, it's a human thing, or a non-human thing, or a spiritual thing. But believe it or not, there are areas of it that do overlap, especially when, what we were talking about originally, when we were talking about the effect of dark powers. When you look at Hollywood, horror movies and whatever, usually it's inflicted on an individual or a family or a group of friends, depending on what the theme of the movie is. And usually when you see a movie that is dark and affects a population or a town, it's usually like from outer space or something like that, or zombies. You never see the darkness of, how can I say it, causing human suffering. And I'm not talking on a political stage. I'm talking about suffering caused by what's done to a population. Okay, like I said, on the face of it, and I'm going to use the example of what me and Allan were talking about: addiction, drugs. God knows we're being overrun with so many different things, the opioids, all these synthetic drugs that are so cheap. And on the face of it, you could say, well, it's the addiction, the horror of the addiction. The suffering it causes for the person, more than likely death, overdosing, or your health is ruined for the rest of your life. Mental illness, some people it fries their brains permanently, no coming back from it. But I wasn't kidding. Besides the suffering, what it does by stages to the family of that individual. Okay, if that person gets together with another person and has a child, in other words, it expands. If it's a child, the parents, it expands the family around them. They suffer when there's a family member that they can't help. Or if it's a child living with one or two parents or family members that are heavily involved in an addictive lifestyle. Okay, it's almost like a gift that's done. And then it just ripples outward to where they live at, the area they live at, the town, everything. It becomes like a dark ripple on the water from the action of, in other words, the addiction is just not a self-contained event of the destruction of that one person's life. Okay. And, or that you could look at and say, well, man, it either killed you or your health is gone. We're talking about the effects on a spiritual level. So let me tell you something. When you're around somebody that's addicted to something, everything around them, is dark. It's dark. It's dark. And I've spoken about in other shows as far as and I've seen it firsthand. The attachments, dark spiritual turbulence and attachments that are part and parcel of an addiction. Okay, and I mean that's a whole nother show. But yeah, and like I said, it keeps on giving darkness and destruction and anguish, and just bad things happening all around, starting with that person, maybe even before them, to ancestors and to their descendants and to their neighbors. And I mean, sometimes people have done horrific things to their neighbors under the effects of drugs. Sometimes people have done horrific things to strangers under the effects of drugs. This is besides the obvious, which is themselves. Okay, this is not a self-contained thing. And then, and of course, then we go out further when we're talking about society. You have the destruction of people that maybe if they weren't addicted of drugs could be really productive parts of society. Yeah, some of them might be geniuses, but it doesn't really matter. As long as, let's say, you're an ordinary good person that is part of a society and becomes part of it and is basically helps to help other human beings. But what if you're addicted to drugs? You're not there. You're not part of the solution. And by this I don't want to, but maybe you're the person that could save a drowning kid, but you're not there. That moment, that role that you might have played if you weren't addicted is not. You're in a crack house somewhere smoking some crack. I mean, it's like endless, what they say, the variations or the butterfly effect. What are the different possibilities of what that person could have been if they weren't addicted? That's what I'm saying. The destruction and the havoc and the anguish that comes with it is, let me tell you something, it's ad infinitum. And, you could look at it and say, well, there's nothing that's non-spiritual. But if you look at it from, okay, the obvious is people produce drugs because they want to make money. They want to sell it and make money all down the line, from the person that manufactures the drug to, the distributorship, to the guy that sells it on the street corner. Everybody's doing it for money. And you can say, well, this is just basically a money thing. But there's something more to it than that. There's a spiritual corruption that goes with it, okay, that you don't have when you sell other things. It's not. It's not. And you could say, well, is there any type of intelligence? When I say intelligence, I mean like a master plan behind it, besides the obvious, which is humans making money along the way. Yeah, you could say that there is behind the scenes, which is what comes of it. What is the effect on the spiritual level of the person and the humans around them? Forget the physical stuff. We know what physically happens to you with drugs. What is the spiritual, emotional disturbances that comes into the ether, into the metaphysical levels? I mean, I think that there's a lot of stuff out there that can be very disturbing, and sometimes it can even feel overwhelming, because you're thinking, well, what am I going to do? Me, one person. You know what? There's a lot of me's, and I've said it before in other shows. We are more powerful on an individual basis than we give ourselves credit for. And I think a lot of times people think, I can't make a difference. I'm just one person against the powers of whatever it is. The government, the cartels, the Illuminati, the devil. Yes, we are we are very, very powerful on an individual basis. Okay? And when you recognize the power that you have on an individual basis, you recognize then the power that you have in a group. Okay, because if you're that powerful by yourself, how much more powerful is when you have a group that are on the same page, wanting the same thing. Okay, and by this I mean, and a lot of people don't think, not even on the physical plane, on a spiritual plane. Okay, putting out positive energy, you go, oh, Marlene, that's so blah, blah, blah. Yeah, if you believe in a metaphysical level, if you believe in the ability of the human mind intent to manifest in the physical what we put out, yes, we can. And I think that a lot of us think, no, that's too easy, that can't happen. Yes, we do it all the time. Okay, all it needs is a little bit of intent and perseverance. And you'd be surprised what one human being can manifest into the reality. Whether it's already in reality but not in your presence, and it will come to you, into your orbit, or something that will come into being because of your intent to bring it into reality, to manifest it. Okay. Yes, we can. And what I'm saying, this is on the positive side, on an individual and on a group basis. And a lot of it, I think, starts with love and compassion. Okay. And this is not to come, because a lot of people think, well, with that, love, peace, and compassion, we're like, you're just going to be sheeple. No. Okay, it's like, don't confuse kindness with weakness. You can be a very kind and compassionate person. That doesn't mean you're weak. It's the contrary. Okay, you can be very, very powerful. Okay, that doesn't mean you're weak. A loving, kind person can be very, very strong. As a matter of fact, one of the strongest. And again, Allan was not too far off the mark when he says that we've been dumbed down. And I'm not talking just educationally or, knowledge-wise. We've been dumbed down as to our abilities as human beings on a physical and on a non-physical level. And believe me, and I've said this before, if we weren't that powerful, nobody would take the trouble to try to harness us or to make us believe certain things, because it wouldn't matter. Okay, when was the last time anybody ran around trying to, okay, let's indoctrinate the chickens, let's indoctrinate the cattle? Who cares? It doesn't matter. But as humans, yes, we do matter a lot. We're powerful, and the same way, unfortunately, that some of us are manipulated into doing bad and evil things, okay, not only for what it does on a physical level, but also for what it causes on a non-physical, metaphysical level. So we can do it on the positive side. And I think that, sometimes if you look especially at the media, a lot of times it makes it look like the world's coming to an end and bad things are just happening. It's always bad stuff, and I don't think so. And I've said it before. I believe in human beings. I believe we will triumph. I believe we will come out at the end of it. And I don't think we're meant here to be perfect. I don't think we should have all the answers. I think the process is that whatever time we're here, we figure things out. We make mistakes. Whether it's collectively as a group, within a family, a town, a city, a state, or on an individual basis. Okay? It's to figure it out, engage in life. But hopefully, okay, even with all our stuff that we human beings do, that we do stupid stuff, that we lie, that we make mistakes, that we say something hurtful, and then you're like, even within that context, okay, I think that the human beings are good, and that we are meant to be, beings of light. We're not meant to be bad. That sometimes we're made that way, molded that way because of circumstances as a child in your life, or sometimes even on purpose. I hate to say that. Okay, it happens. But at the end, like I said, I'm the eternal optimist. I am the eternal optimist. And hoping I'm going to bring Allan back. There's so many things we could talk about. God. And I'm hoping you guys are going to come back and look at that show. And I do want to thank you for coming and, listening or seeing these shows with all these different guests. I've got a lot of interesting ones coming up. Pretty soon I'm working on season 7 of Stories of the Supernatural. And the True Believer Stories, it's on supernaturalstorytime.com. And then if you're into the classic ghost stories, go to nightshadediary.com. And you're going to find me on all the social media platforms. Like I said, usually I'll put on there links to stories so you can even listen to the podcasts either from the social media platform, or you go to miamighostchronicles.com. You find the actual MP3 files you can download, or links to the different podcast platforms like iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify. You're going to find the shows there, or the links to the YouTube video, however you want to see it. Okay, again, if you have suggestions for either subject matter for guests, that by all means send them to me. I'm working on another book, and I'm working I'm trying to bring some true believers that I could actually film, that won't just send me stories, that I would like to interview them, even if I don't get them, that I could interview them even on their voice, for them to tell the story, because I'd love to hear, even though I can retell other people write the story, I love to hear when people tell the story, especially when it's their own experience. There's just something about it that's, that it's not the same thing when it's retold, in other words. So yeah, I've got a lot of good things planned. And again, you guys are wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's interesting. Take care, guys.